The forest was silent under the weight of the morning sun. From the shadows, a figure emerged with eyes sharp as molten amber and jaws lined with blades of death. This was Albertosaurus, a predator feared by every living thing that dared to cross its path. The ground trembled under each step as the giant prowled toward the river, where herds gathered to drink. No creature was safe from its hunger, and no rival could claim its throne without blood. The age of survival belonged to hunters, and none was deadlier than Albertosaurus. The land that would one day become North America stretched wide under a sky painted with rolling clouds and streaks of light. Swamps spread like green mirrors reflecting tall conifer trees, while ferns and cycads grew thick in clusters across open plains. Rivers cut through the landscape, carrying life to every corner where fish and amphibians thrived. This was the late Cretaceous world nearly 70 million years ago, a place where survival shaped every creature that walked, swam, or flew. It was a land rich with diversity, yet filled with constant danger, for the balance of life demanded struggle. In this age of giants, few names carried as much weight as Albertosaurus. Belonging to the same family as the mighty Tyrannosaurus rex, this predator was lighter, faster, and more agile, yet just as deadly. Standing over 8 meters long and armed with rows of serrated teeth, Albertosaurus was a master hunter built for pursuit and swift takedowns. Its powerful legs gave it speed on the open plains, while its keen senses allowed it to track prey from great distances. Every movement of its body carried the mark of evolution, a design perfected for predation. The herds of hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, that roamed in vast numbers were its primary targets. These plant-eaters grazed near rivers, feeding on lush vegetation, yet they lived under constant threat. Whenever an Albertosaurus prowled nearby, the herds would grow restless, their calls sharp and uneasy as they pressed closer together for safety. Horned dinosaurs like Centrosaurus also crossed its path, defending their young with shields and horns, yet even they could not always withstand the ambush of an experienced hunter. The very presence of Albertosaurus influenced how prey moved and lived, shaping the ecosystem itself. But the world of the late Cretaceous was never static. Climate shifts changed the vegetation seasons, brought floods and droughts, and rival predators challenged each other for territory. Raptors hunted in packs using intelligence and cooperation, while giant crocodiles lurked in rivers waiting for the careless. To rise as a dominant predator, Albertosaurus had to face not only its prey, but also these rivals. It was not merely a battle for food, it was a battle for survival and dominance. At the heart of the story lies a single Albertosaurus, one that has reached maturity and stands as a formidable force within its range. Its journey is not only about hunting, but about defending its place in a world where danger lurks in every corner. From the silent stalk across open fields to the violent clash against rivals, every step of his life is bound by the struggle to endure. The story of Albertosaurus is more than the tale of the predator. It is a saga of power, hunger, and survival etched into the bones of time. As the sun rises and shadows dance across the land, the stage is set for one of the most fearsome hunters of Cretaceous to prove itself again. Each encounter will test its strength and instincts. Each challenge will push it closer to the edge of life and death. Through its eyes, the world of the past unfolds raw and untamed, a reminder of the relentless struggle that once defined this earth. This is the tale of Albertosaurus, the northern tyrant, whose reign was written in the silence of fear and the roar of triumph. The day began like many others in the northern Cretaceous plains. A pale mist clung to the riverside as the herds of hadrosaurs moved slowly through the wetlands, feeding on tender shoots. Their calls carried softly through the morning air like low notes in a song that echoed across the forest edge. For the herds, this was routine, a chance to graze, while the world still carried the calm of dawn. But not all creatures shared their peace. Hidden among the shadows, a predator stirred with hunger burning in its belly. The Albertosaurus had not eaten in several days. The lean muscles of its body carried both strength and desperation. Its ribs pressed faintly against the hide, showing that the last hunt had not yielded enough to satisfy. Hunger sharpened its senses, making every rustle leaves and every distant call a signal to investigate. The herds represented survival, but reaching them meant risk, for the hadrosaurs were not without defense. In groups, their numbers provided a shield, and the sharp eyes of their sentinels could spot danger long before it struck. The predator crouched low near the edge of the trees, its yellow eyes locked onto the moving shapes. Each step of the herd revealed opportunity, yet also danger. Young calves stumbled behind their mothers, struggling to keep pace, while the stronger adults gathered near the flanks. To bring one down, the hunter needed precision and timing. One mistake would send the entire herd into a stampede, leaving nothing but dust in the air. The morning sun grew stronger, burning away the mist and making concealment harder. The Albertosaurus had to decide. Hunger growled within like a voice urging it forward, yet instinct warned against recklessness. As it inched closer, the herd stirred. A sentinel lifted its head, ears twitching, nose flaring. A low warning sound spread from one hadrosaur to another. The herd tightened formation, pressing the young toward the center. The balance had shifted. The element of surprise was slipping away. Then came the moment that would change everything. A smaller hadrosaur calf separated from the group, drawn by a patch of fresh ferns near the water. Its mother was distracted, lowering her head to drink. The calf lingered a few steps too far from the herd, its back exposed to the forest edge. To the Albertosaurus, it was a signal, an opening that could not be ignored. Hunger roared in its chest, overpowering hesitation. With a burst of speed, it launched from the trees, its footsteps pounding like thunder across the plain. The herd erupted in chaos. Calls rose into the air, sharp and frantic, as adults rushed to shield their young. The calf let out a shrill cry, stumbling, as it turned to flee. Dust rose in clouds as dozens of hadrosaurs surged forward their bodies, crashing against each other in desperate escape. Yet the predator's eyes saw only the calf, every stride narrowing the distance between them. Its jaws opened wide, revealing serrated teeth ready to strike. But the hunt did not unfold as expected. Just as the Albertosaurus lunged, a shadow moved across the plain. Another predator burst from the opposite side of the clearing, smaller, yet swift, its long claws flashing in the sun. A pair of dromaeosaurs had also chosen this moment to strike, drawn by the same vulnerable calf. In an instant, prey became the center of conflict. The calf bolted toward its mother, while the predators clashed in pursuit. The Albertosaurus swung its massive tail, striking the ground as it turned on the raptors. Snarls and shrieks filled the air. The herd scattered in every direction, leaving a trail of broken plants and splashing water. The calf was lost among the mass of bodies, vanishing back into safety. What remained was confrontation. Hunger unsatisfied. Rival hunters unwilling to yield. The Albertosaurus had revealed itself too soon, and now its place as apex predator was being challenged. The air thickened with tension. The failed hunt was not merely about lost food. It was the spark of a larger conflict, one that would force the Albertosaurus to fight not just for survival, but for dominance in its territory. The plains no longer felt like a land of plenty. They had become a battleground, and every choice from this moment onward would carry consequence. The failure of the hunt echoed like a wound inside the Albertosaurus. Hunger did not vanish simply because the prey had escaped. Instead, it deepened, gnawing at the belly like fire. The calf had been within reach. The taste of victory had been close enough to imagine, yet stolen in an instant by rival hunters. The dromaeosaurs had slunk back into trees, watching with bright eyes that gleamed like daggers in the dim light. Their cries still lingered in the air, sharp and mocking. They had not claimed the calf either, but in their interference they had denied the giant its meal. The Albertosaurus stood at the edge of the clearing, chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Its tail lashed through the grass, flattening reeds in frustration. The herd had long fled, leaving silence in its wake. Broken stems and deep footprints marked the ground, telling the story of the chaos that had unfolded. Yet the silence was not peace. The predators were still here, circling. The raptors were smaller, but they carried the advantage of numbers and cunning. From the shadows, two pairs of glowing eyes moved carefully among the trees. The Albertosaurus turned, its head muscles rippling along its neck. A warning growl rumbled from its throat, low and guttural. The dromaeosaurs answered with screeches high-pitched and filled with boldness. They were not afraid. Hunger made all creatures reckless. For a long moment none moved. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Then the raptors darted forward, claws scratching the ground as they tested the resolve of the larger predator. Their movements were swift, never direct, always circling just beyond the sweep of the giant's jaws. The Albertosaurus snapped its teeth, sending one raptor leaping back with a hiss. The other slashed across its flank, leaving a shallow line that stung though it barely pierced the thick hide. Blood welled, and the scent spread into the air sharp and metallic. That scent changed the balance. The raptors had drawn first blood. Their cries grew louder, echoing through the forest. From the distance came more calls answered in quick succession. The Albertosaurus froze as realization struck. These two were not alone. The pack was larger than it had thought. The cries multiplied until they surrounded the clearing. Hunger had led it into danger. With a powerful bellow, the Albertosaurus reared up, forcing the smaller predators to scatter back into the underbrush. It had no choice but to retreat. Standing its ground against so many would mean certain death. Its strength was great, but even giants would be overwhelmed by relentless claws and teeth. The forest offered shadows and distance. It turned crashing through the trees, leaving the raptors behind to screech their victory into the sky. The retreat was bitter. Every step carried the weight of failure and the sharp burn of hunger. The wound along its flank throbbed, reminding it of the danger of underestimating smaller foes. The Albertosaurus moved deeper into the forest, following the river. Water glistened under the sun, and dragonflies darted across its surface. Here life thrived. Turtles basked on rocks, and fish stirred in the shallows. But for a predator of its size, such prey was meaningless. It needed flesh large enough to sustain its massive body. Days passed in restless search. The Albertosaurus tracked herds across open plains, but they were wary, moving as one with their young guarded in the center. It prowled near the edges of the wetlands, but the dense mud slowed its speed, making ambush impossible. Once it tried to corner a group of smaller ceratopsians near the cliffs, yet the herd turned as one horns lowered, forcing it back. Hunger only grew heavier. During these days of struggle, the wound along its side began to heal, yet the scar it left burned deeper inside its pride. The memory of the raptors lingered like a constant reminder. The Albertosaurus was meant to rule these plains, yet its dominance had been challenged. The balance of the land was shifting. Where once it had hunted without rival, now others dared to test its claim. Then came the turning point. While following the river, the Albertosaurus caught a new scent on the wind. It was not the sweet musk of hadrosaurs, nor the earthy tang of ceratopsians. This was sharper, thicker, heavy, with the unmistakable odor of another predator. The giant froze, nostrils flaring as it traced the air. The scent was fresh. It carried across the riverbank, leading toward the open plains. Caution warred with hunger. To follow meant stepping into another predator's range, but to ignore meant surrendering territory without fight. The Albertosaurus growled low as if answering its own doubt. These lands had been its hunting ground since youth. To give them up was to yield its claim as apex hunter. Pride demanded action. The trail led to a clearing where the remains of a carcass lay scattered across the ground. Bones stripped of flesh glistened in the sun. Flies buzzed in clouds above the scene. The smell of blood was overwhelming, thick in the air. The kill had been recent. Tracks pressed into the soil showed three-toed prints large enough to belong to a predator of similar strength. The Albertosaurus lowered its head, studying the impressions. They were not from raptors. This was something larger. The discovery ignited a new fire. Another giant walked these plains. The thought unsettled yet excited. The hunger in its belly merged with a primal instinct older than memory. The need not only to eat, but to dominate to prove strength. Every creature carved its place in this land through survival, and survival was never gentle. As the sun dipped lower, painting the horizon in red, the Albertosaurus moved on, following the trail of its unseen rival. Each step was deliberate, muscles coiled tight, ready for confrontation. It knew the risks. A battle with an equal could end in death. Yet the alternative was worse. To live in fear, to skulk in shadows, while another feasted freely on prey that once belonged to it. That was no life for a predator born to rule. The rising moon cast pale light through the trees as night fell. The world changed its song. Frogs croaked from the water's edge, and insects hummed in steady rhythm. The Albertosaurus pressed forward, every sense alert. In the distance, a roar broke the stillness, deep and resonant. It was not the cry of hadrosaurs, nor the bellow of ceratopsians. It was the challenge of another hunter. The Albertosaurus answered with a roar of its own, thunder rolling through the forest, shaking leaves from branches. The sound carried far across the plains, a declaration of presence and intent. There would be no retreat now. The stage had been set. Rival predators would soon clash. Yet even as it called to battle hunger, continued to gnaw within, the outcome was uncertain. Victory promised dominance and food. Defeat meant death and silence. Between these two paths, the Albertosaurus moved forward, unyielding, driven by pride and by the unbreakable law of its world. The night was alive with the sound of challenge. The roar of the rival predator still echoed through the valley when the Albertosaurus stepped into the open plain. Its massive frame caught the silver light of the moon, its eyes glowing like molten amber. Hunger throbbed inside its belly, but something stronger now moved it forward. This was no longer only about survival. This was about dominance. Across the plain, a figure emerged from the shadows. Taller than the Albertosaurus, by only a margin, yet thick with muscle and scar tissue, the rival predator revealed itself. It was another tyrant, a Daspletosaurus scarred from countless battles, its hide patterned with old wounds. The smell of blood still clung to its jaws, marking it as the one who had feasted on the fresh carcass earlier. The two giants locked eyes across the grassland. Silence held for a long moment as the air tightened with tension. In that silence, the Albertosaurus understood the truth. Only one could remain as master of this hunting ground. The land did not tolerate equals. With a thunderous bellow, the Daspletosaurus charged forward, tail whipping the ground as dust rose around its feet. The Albertosaurus roared back the sound, shaking the night air, then surged to meet the challenge. The impact when they collided shook the earth like thunder. Teeth clashed against teeth, claws raked across scales, and both predators pushed with the weight of titans. The Daspletosaurus struck, first with its heavy skull, slamming into the side of the Albertosaurus. The blow sent pain searing through its ribs, but the Albertosaurus twisted, snapping its jaws down against the shoulder of its foe. Bone crunched under the pressure of its bite, drawing a scream of rage from the rival. Blood sprayed hot and heavy, staining the grass. But the battle was not won. The Daspletosaurus reared up, dragging claws across the back of the Albertosaurus, tearing long lines of flesh. The pain flared white-hot, but the Albertosaurus did not yield. It had endured hunger, it had endured humiliation by smaller hunters. It would not endure defeat here. They circled each other, tails lashing, striking against the ground like whips. Their roars filled the air, echoing far into the forest, where smaller creatures had trembling in silence. The smell of blood spread thick and heavy. Each movement carried the weight of exhaustion, yet neither faltered. This was not a fight that could end with retreat. The Albertosaurus lunged, low jaws snapping for the rival's leg. The Daspletosaurus dodged, but not fast enough. Teeth clamped down, crushing muscle and tendon. The rival screamed, stumbling as its balance faltered. In that moment, the Albertosaurus pressed its advantage, throwing its weight forward, knocking the Daspletosaurus onto its side. The ground quaked with the fall. Yet even down, the rival fought fiercely. Its massive head swung sideways, teeth slicing into the thigh of the Albertosaurus, tearing deep into flesh. Pain burst through the giant's body, and for a heartbeat it staggered, nearly collapsing. Blood poured down its legs, staining the earth. Both predators now bled freely, each wound threatening to drag them into weakness. But the Albertosaurus drew on something beyond pain. Pride burned within it, stronger than the hunger in its belly. It remembered the lost calf, the mocking cries of the raptors, the endless days of failure. This was the moment where all of that could be erased. Summoning every ounce of strength, the Albertosaurus reared up and brought its skull crashing down onto the neck of the Daspletosaurus. The impact drove its rival's head into the earth with brutal force. Before the rival could recover, the Albertosaurus clamped its jaws around its throat. The struggle was furious, claws and tail striking in wild desperation, but the grip held. The sound of crunching bones split the night. The rival's roars grew weaker, softer, until they broke into silence. The great bodies shuddered once, then lay still. Dust settled across the plain. The battle was over. The Albertosaurus staggered back, sides heaving with heavy breaths. Blood dripped from its wounds, yet its eyes still burned with fire. It had endured. It had triumphed. The Daspletosaurus lay lifeless, its body sprawled across the field. The Albertosaurus raised its head to the moon and roared a final cry of victory that shook the stars above. The sound carried far. It echoed across the forest, across the river, into the herds that grazed in the distance. It was a sound that declared the truth of the night. The Albertosaurus was still master here. It had fought not only for food, but for dominance, and had won. Hunger now returned to the forefront. Slowly the victor approached the fallen rival, its massive jaws lowering to tear into flesh. The meat was fresh, the blood still hot. The irony of feasting upon another predator was not lost on instinct. It was dangerous. It was brutal. But in this land, survival had never been gentle. Each bite renewed its strength. Each swallow silenced the burning hunger that had haunted it for days. This was no calf snatched away by rivals. This was a feast taken by force, by dominance, earned through pain and fury. The taste of victory was heavy on its tongue. When the meal was done, the Albertosaurus raised its head, once more blood staining its jaws. Around it the plain lay silent, broken only by the rustle of the wind. The stars shone down cold and unblinking, yet in that vast emptiness the predator stood unyielding. It limped slightly from its wounds, but its steps carried the weight of triumph. The land still belonged to it. The future would bring more challenges, more rivals, and endless hunger, but for this night the Albertosaurus had carved its truth into the earth. It was master. It was survivor. It was the unbroken tyrant of the plains. The plain lay in eerie silence after the clash of titans. Dust still lingered in the air, faintly glowing under the pale light of the moon. The carcass of the fallen Daspletosaurus remained sprawled across the ground, a grim monument to the violence that had unfolded. The Albertosaurus stood near it, bloodied, and exhausted, its breast ragged, as though each one carried the weight of mountains. The predator lowered itself slowly, its body trembling from the strain of the fight. Wounds along its thigh and back burned with every movement, blood still seeping into the earth beneath it. The pain was sharp but not fatal. It had survived worse, and survival was all that mattered. Yet even in victory, it could not remain still for long. The scent of blood thickened the air, and the forest around the plain began to stir with new life. Carrion birds circled overhead, black silhouettes against the night sky. Their shrill cries rang out like a chorus of scavengers already calling claim to what remained the battlefield. Small predators crept closer, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark, eager but cautious. None dared approach, while the Albertosaurus still stood guard, but the whispers of the forest made clear that they waited. Dragging itself closer to the carcass, the Albertosaurus fed again, though the act was slower and more deliberate than before. Each bite was heavy, each tear of flesh a reminder of the battle fought. The taste of meat renewed its body, but could not erase the deep exhaustion that clung to its muscles. Still it continued, for strength was essential. If it faltered now, its victory would mean nothing. As the night deepened, a cool wind swept across the plain, carrying away some of the heavy smell of blood. The Albertosaurus lifted its head, jaws still red, and gazed across the silent land. In the distance, the herds it had once stalked remained restless, their movements uneasy. They had heard the roars, the clash, the cries of death. They would not soon forget. For them the plain was now marked by fear. Yet in that fear lay opportunity. The Albertosaurus understood in instinct, if not in thought, that it had secured more than a meal. It had claimed dominance. The rival was gone, and no predator remained strong enough to contest its rule for now. Even the herds would sense that the land now belonged to one master. Fatigue pressed heavier against its body with each passing moment. The predator stepped away from the carcass, finding a patch of ground where the grass was tall enough to shield it from view. With a groan, it lowered itself carefully onto its side, muscles quivering with the relief of rest. The stars above gleamed cold and distant, watching the great beast as it closed its eyes. Sleep did not come easily, but eventually exhaustion pulled it into uneasy slumber. When dawn broke, the plain was no longer silent. Carrion birds had descended in flocks, tearing at what the Albertosaurus had left. Smaller scavengers darted in and out, seizing scraps of meat and bone. The air buzzed with the noise of feeding, but none approached the bloody giant that lay hidden in the tall grass. Its presence still radiated threat even in sleep. By the time the sun rose higher, the Albertosaurus stirred once more. Its wounds ached and its legs stiffened from the injury, but it forced itself up. Weakness was dangerous. To remain too long near the carcass would invite challengers. Already the smell of decay thickened around the battlefield. It was time to move. Limping slowly, the Albertosaurus left the plain behind. Each step was measured heavy with fatigue, yet filled with determination. The rival was gone. The hunger that had driven it to desperation was silenced for now. It had survived not just through strength, but through sheer will. Behind it, the land would soon return to balance. The carcass would be stripped to bone by scavengers. The herds would edge back into the valley, their fear slowly fading. Life would continue, as it always had. But in the memory of the night, one truth will remain carved into the silence. The Albertosaurus had proven itself. The plain was still its kingdom. The forest breathed again as days passed beyond the battle. The chaos of roars and claws faded into the echoes of memory, leaving behind only whispers carried by the wind. The carcass of the Daspletosaurus was nothing more than bones scattered across the plain, picked clean by countless scavengers. What had once been a violent arena of survival was now reclaimed by silence and growth. Grass rose again around the remains and flowers spread across the edges, as though life itself sought to bury the memory of blood. The Albertosaurus had withdrawn deep into the forest, nursing its wounds and conserving its strength. Each scar etched across its body told a story of survival, and each step it took reminded the world of the price of dominance. At first its movements were slow labor by the injury in its thigh and the gashes across its back. Yet day by day its body hardened once more. Muscles repaired themselves, bones carried weight with renewed force, and the predator's stride grew steady. It no longer needed to prove itself. The rival was gone and no challenger rose in its place. The herds of hadrosaurs and ceratopsians grazed carefully in the valley, always aware of the presence hidden among the trees. When the Albertosaurus emerged from the shadows, they scattered in waves of fear. Their calls filled the air a warning and a prayer. The predator hunted when hunger demanded yet never wasted effort. It struck with precision, knowing that survival was not about endless killing, but about balance. As seasons shifted, the Albertosaurus grew wiser in its rule of the land. It followed the migration paths of prey, not with reckless hunger, but with patience. It chose the weak and the slow, leaving the herd stronger and itself well-fed. The forest came to know its rhythm. The birds quieted when it passed the smaller creatures, stilled at the sound of its footsteps, and the rivers carried its reflection, as if honoring the guardian of the plain. At night the stars returned, always watching. The same stars that had shone upon the battle now glimmered above a quieter life. Sometimes the Albertosaurus stood beneath them and released a low rumbling call into the darkness. It was not a cry of challenge, but of presence, a voice that said, "I endure." The valleys and forests answered in silence, yet the message lingered. This was its domain. In the cycles of life and death, the Albertosaurus became more than a predator. It became a shadow of stability, a force woven into the land itself. The herds feared it, but they also thrived beneath its rule, for without a hunter balance would break, and the weak would overrun the strong. Its presence was both terror and necessity. The scars on its body remained, but they no longer ached. Instead, they became marks of story etched forever into its flesh. The great battle with the Daspletosaurus was not forgotten, yet it no longer defined the creature. What mattered was not the clash of teeth and claws, but the endurance that followed. The predator had survived not for a day, not for a season, but for the turning of years. One dawn, the Albertosaurus stood on a high ridge overlooking the valley. Mist rolled across the land, glowing under the first light of the sun. Herds grazed peacefully far below their calls, echoing faintly in the cool air. The predator's eyes watched without hunger for once. It stood tall to the rising sun, painting its figure in gold and crimson. The world was alive beneath it, and it was part of that world, unchallenged, unbroken. It did not roar. It did not need to. The silence was enough. The land itself knew the truth. The Albertosaurus was master of this kingdom not by endless violence, but by survival patience and the unyielding will to endure. And as the sun rose higher, burning away the mist, the predator turned and stepped back into the forest, its shadow stretching long across the earth. The story of its reign was not finished. It would walk these lands for as long as life allowed. The plain, the forest, the river, all belonged to it now, and the legacy of the Albertosaurus would linger in the heartbeat of the land long after its roars had faded. The king of the plain endured.